Well, good evening, folks. With this nice weather out there, you never know. We had about 60 plus people register for this, and we never know who's going to show up, which is why we do make sure that we record these pieces for everyone and keep all that going. So I just have the fewest of updates from Michigan Climate Action Network before we turn things over today and while we let folks get in here and get welcomed to the space. I bet everyone is thinking about their Earth Day. Yes? What are you guys doing in a couple weeks? We put together a ton of events from all over the state. Please check it out. I know this group considers every day is Earth Day. That's how we should be thinking about this and acting in our worldviews. And I just wanted to, I'll throw a few things in the chat here. If you're looking for an event, or still have an event that you want to upload, please share it with us. Part of our mission to amplify and connect and support folks really is about sharing out your events and making sure that those communities get connected to them where you are. And while you're at that Earth Day, I think the biggest action that we have going on right now, and Erica actually just joined us, but I'll do her spiel for her. The biggest action we still have right now is trying to shut down Line 5 and really sending those petitions to President Biden and to our Congress people. Erica is on here. We were actually in a lovely meeting today with some of Representative Skolton's staff in the 3rd Congressional District in Grand Rapids talking about such things and trying to move some of these positions. If you haven't signed those petitions yet, I threw those in the chat as well. Please do that and continue to support that. And if you're interested, if you're especially over here on the west side with Erica and I, Grand Rapids, Kalamazoo, we are over here trying to move the needle on our Congress people on this side of the state. And I threw your email in the chat. If you do want to connect with Erica and do some of this work with us, you are more than welcome. We will tell you and teach you anything you need to know. I think the next big thing that we have going on, we're almost ready, folks, to release all of our candidate questionnaires. We're doing an entire campaign billed as from Earth Day to Election Day. And the biggest piece of this will be driving a lot of voter engagement. We're going to be sharing out voter resource guides from Science on the Ballot, from Michigan Student Power Alliance, from Citizens Climate Lobby. We've got some wonderful deep canvassing resources so that we can all understand how to talk to each other better and how to talk to your friends and family. Thanks, Erica fixed her own email there in the chat. I must have cut it off. Thank you. To how we can really talk about these things with each other. And the big piece that we are all working on has been some candidate questions. These are focusing on everything from increasing that renewable energy standard, eliminating the DG cap, true community solar, advancing Justice 40, and even all the way into campaign finance. If you've really been following along with MyCam and the bills from last fall that Pam was just asking about, one of the reasons that we didn't get as much as we could in those bills is because of the opposition from the utility companies and the money that they're able to pour into that system. And so we are asking some questions around that. We're about to unveil these and we'll be asking for your help. The questions are really geared towards all of the Michigan State House is up for election this year, and they are geared towards those candidates. There are several groups out there working on municipal level, county level questionnaires as well. Grand Rapids, I think Lansing and Ann Arbor, and we'll be sharing those out and helping folks create those as well. So it's a big electoral year, folks, and we need to make sure that climate is at the top priority of those justice demands. The other big thing I want to share with everybody, if you didn't make it to our members meeting, a couple weeks ago now, we are now also in a space called Mighty Network. It's a little bit in between Slack and like Microsoft Teams. It's a space, a private space where all of you can connect and communicate with each other. I'll put the link in there, and I see a couple folks on here. I'm excited for many of our steering committee members who have been able to go ahead and make their own spaces in there. So if your group doesn't have the ability to communicate in some other fashion, right? And you're tired of email, this is the space for you. That really is able to connect directly. You can make sure you're sharing your events in there. You can see who other members are. You can talk to them. And we've got a lot of spaces built out for folks now, kind of the central climate hub where general stuff can go. And we're starting what's called a climate culture club. So think book club, but beyond. How do arts, the media, all sorts of comics even, right? How does we think about our lives in this world, and how can we be relating better to each other? So really excited to start these spaces with all of you. And I don't know if anybody from Van Buren Climate Action Team is on here, but they're the first to have started their own unique space in this platform. And we're pretty excited about that. That link is in the chat. You can join that straight up and make sure that this piece happens. Oh, there are some VB Cat folks here. Hey, Jonathan. And with a little bit of a fond farewell for our climate influencers. Oh, hi, Lois. How you guys doing? Excellent. We just wrapped up these 3 fine young people who had been with us for the last 12 weeks, helping us really learn about youth messaging and learning about their audiences and what they were interested in. And we hope we helped them a little bit as well with social media, how to do good posting, what it really takes to be a climate communications professional out there in the world. They were a ton of fun to work with, and I'm not quite ready with the link yet, but we're about to do a second round of this cohort that will run from May to August. So please stay tuned. We're going to be putting out this call again for youth 18 to 25-year-olds. They can be anywhere in Michigan. It's like 5-10 hours a week. We offer a $1,500 stipend to come learn with us and to learn from each other. And it's just a load of fun to work with these young people. And last but not least is our climate summit. I think everybody is on the know now that we will be at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor on September 26th. That is a Thursday, and we are treating this as a true get out the climate vote rally festival. The theme is climate civics. We're doing panels on everything from energy democracy to energy independence to why is the press, the free press, an essential part of our democracy, and how groups, I really want to focus on why and how groups form in America and what our true role is, how hard it is, right, to fight the money and the powers that be. And so that's what we're gearing up to really do there. And with that, I think my last one really should be, oh, get over there, to introduce our guest for this evening. I am so pleased. Gotten to work with the Detroiters Working for Environmental Justice through a variety of coalitions in the state, and the EJ caucus, and in the larger coalition that brought you the rally last fall. I have learned a lot from this organization, from their executive director, and in particular from our speaker tonight, who is the Climate and Energy Justice lead, Andrew Kaplowitz. I think that you should go ahead and we're going to give you a nice round of applause here and take it away. Let me see if I can stop sharing though. There it goes. Sorry about that. All right, everybody. Well, Andrew is here with us. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate the time that you're taking to share the story of Detroiters Working for Environmental Justice with us, and I can't wait to hear all about it and answer some questions. I know you've got a fun session planned for us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Janice. I really appreciate it. And also thank you to everyone who's tuning in. I know that you have all very full lives and it's a beautiful day out here. So I understand people being off video. I totally respect that decision too, right? We're all human beings and I'm just honored that you're choosing to spend some time listening to me. And so with that said, I think my approach to using this time is to tell you a little bit about myself so that way you know who I am and you know where I'm coming from. Tell you about Detroiters Working for Environmental Justice and some of the work that we're doing right now, but try and keep that portion pretty brief and really open it up to questions, comments, conversations, because in my own work and beliefs, I think that relationship building is really fundamental to what we do. And, you know, it helps us all do our work better when we actually can connect to each other. So I don't want to overly anticipate what your interests are. So start thinking of questions. Feel free to interrupt me at any point in time too. I'm totally comfortable with that. Maybe if I could get some help keeping an eye on the chat while I'm sharing a presentation.
I
Um,
gotcha.
cool. So, like I said, my name's Andrew Kaplowitz. I'm the Climate and Energy Justice Lead at Detroiters Working for Environmental Justice. I was born and raised in mid-Michigan. I really think I grew up near Sleeping Bear Dunes, so spending time outside was a majorly influential, impact in my own personal life. Um, and then I went to school. I was studying earth and planetary science, and I realized so many of the issues that we're facing in our society are actually based on our inability to connect with each other, to work together as people, to act, with intentionality and forethought. So I switched my degree to American Studies, which was pretty liberal artsy. I got a minor in African American Studies, and then I left to try and do good in the world. I did a bunch of stuff, some artistic minded, some social justice minded, including like Peace Corps in Nicaragua. And one of my big takeaways from that experience was that if I want to create change, I really need to be deeply rooted in place. Um, Otherwise, there's just, I think, a lot of parachuting that comes in. And I definitely learned a lot from my experience in Peace Corps, but I was also, looking at the contradictions of trying to help teach people entrepreneurship while the same, government that was paying my stipend to be there was advocating for like sweatshops and factories that were disrupting local economies and subsistence agricultural systems. And there's a big sort of cognitive dissonance there in terms of being a part of that system. So I really wanted to come and get more rooted locally. So I moved back to Michigan. I knew I wanted to be somewhere urban, came to Detroit. And I've been here for about 6 years. So I live in Southwest Detroit. I've got chickens in my backyard, so I'm personally pretty excited about the new ordinance that Detroit's working on. And I think it's really important that I know my neighbors. And I live in Mexican town, so I get to practice my Spanish with them. And that's just a little bit about me. My work within the environmental justice movement really stemmed out of, in 2020 with the George Floyd uprisings, I got really politicized and was able to connect with a lot of folks who have been doing a lot of racial justice organizing. And that was my main focus. I wasn't really looking specifically at the environment for a long time, but some comrades in that struggle pointed me towards line 3, where some Anishinaabe, Lakota, really international tribal community was coming together to fight against an Enbridge oil pipeline. And when I went out there, I saw how a principled approach to environmental justice could really encapsulate racial justice, economic justice, all these other sorts of frameworks that we look at and generally view as pretty disparate. So once I came back from Minnesota, I was working on Line 5 stuff, doing a lot of grassroots organizing, and started to apply for jobs that were in environmental justice and found this position at DWEJ. Really appreciated the interview that I had with Lucretia, who Denise mentioned. I see Guy Williams is on here, which is a name I've heard a lot of, a former executive director at DWEJ. So good to see your face. And yeah, so over the past year or so, a little bit more, I've been working as the Climate and Energy Justice Lead at DWEJ. So I'll dive into the presentation now. Let me share my screen. And here we go. So the mission of DWEJ is to advocate for a healthy environment through innovative community and policy action that values all people. And our vision is all people benefiting from environmental policies and policy processes that value the voices and reflects the will of impacted communities. And I think, looking at these things, the one thing that really resonates with me about the work is this idea that, we can all rise together, right? So if we look at those most impacted and make sure that we're building a society that works for them, we're also going to be building the society that works for us. It's kind of like a linked fate analysis in my mind, or some language that I've come across that has been helpful. And then our focus is looking at environmental health disparities specifically. And the top ones in Detroit are asthma. We have a ton of air polluters in the area. We have trucks, building demolitions, uh, everything like that contributes to asthma. Mold from flooding that we've all like had a big surge in floods in our basements and sewer backups. So all of that contributes to asthma. Lead poisoning also from the built environment, right? When I started at DWEJ, this is one of those big, I think, reframings that was really helpful was, oh, the built environment is part of our environment too. It's not just about the polar bears, although save the polar bears, right? But it's also about the society that we live in and the structures that we actually spend our time in. And then cardiovascular disease. So that's some of our focus right now. And then how do we actually address these things? And what we do is we have programs that do individual level interventions that involve people doing one-on-one education, helping folks figure out skills to manage asthma or to get tested for lead poisoning and get connected with resources around that, know what to look for in terms of what lead paint looks like and where it's most likely to be found, but also to try and give people an avenue to take further action. We know that those individual level interventions are great, and that also these problems are systemic. So our approach to addressing them needs to be systemic as well. So that looks like political action, policy advocacy, and things of that nature. What are some of our principles? I'm guessing if you're choosing to tune into this, you're probably familiar with some of these. The 17 Principles of Environmental Justice was founded, so the founder of Detroiters Working for Environmental Justice is Donnell Wilkins, and she was at the first People of Color summit where these principles are sort of like outlined, and talked a lot about safety in the workplace, and has told the story of her being able to present that principle at that first summit. So that's one of our like founding principles, or some of our guiding principles. We also have the Jemez principles, which comes from Jemez, New Mexico, where there was another indigenous-led gathering where people got together and talked about, hey, how do we actually work between some of these large corporate structured green organizations and grassroots folks, right? That's a question that still exists today, right? Which is why these are some guiding principles. With the understanding, just like norms, right? It's not like everything is going to be true all the time, but it's important to sort of relift these things up. And then I'm sorry, my pronunciation is probably going to be wrong with this, but the Nguzo Sabah, did I say that right? Or if anyone can correct me, please do, because I'm interested in learning. But those are basically African-based principles that are often taught around the holiday of Kwanzaa as well. And they offer other sorts of a value system that helps guide our approach to this work. So our team is very diverse. We have all sorts of different backgrounds and some of the stuff that we do. So in terms of community engagement and education, as I mentioned before, we have some community health workers that are actually going into people's homes, having conversations with them, doing outreach at different events and fairs, and then also showing up to other fights as well. So REACH is the community health worker program, and that's looking at things like indoor and outdoor air quality, lead hazards, and connecting folks with resources, things like cleaning supplies that aren't going to irritate people's lungs. Then we also do this program called the Detour, which is a tour of Detroit, which looks at both where some of the issues are, where some of the major polluters are in the city of Detroit, and also where some of the big successes have been in terms of reclaiming green space. And in a lot of ways, a lot of people don't understand that Detroit's like a leader in urban agriculture. Um, and that there's so many like abundant green spaces that are utilized by people in the city of Detroit. So trying to highlight some of those positive sides of things as well. Climate energy justice work. This is sort of where most of my stuff is rooted. And that looks like a little bit more advocacy oriented, a little bit more policy oriented, but still rooted in community. So also hosting things like climate salons, which are more informal gatherings, facilitated conversations, opportunities to bring in community members to connect and open up the conversation about, hey, if we had an abundant world with all the resources at our fingertips, what would we want to see? Because that mental flip is something that so often people who are on the front lines don't have the opportunity to take a step back and realize, hey, there are funders that are available and excited to help, fuel your program, whether that's building a resiliency hub in your neighborhood, whether that's a farm, some other project. So trying to connect people with resources through that. And then also looking at energy infrastructure. That looks like utility accountability, that looks like renewable energy, and so on and so forth. And of course, with talking about energy infrastructure, we have a number of different programs that we do around trying to help people reduce their energy burden. Energy burden is the term that basically means if you're paying more than 6% of your monthly income on your energy bill, you're considered to be burdened. Unfortunately, that's super common in Detroit, and that's for a number of reasons. Old homes, a lot of the homes in Detroit have been built over 100 years ago, so they're less energy efficient. Overtaxing by the city of Detroit, which is a huge problem. Disinvestment from the neighborhoods by the city government in favor of development districts. And I won't go too far down the rabbit hole as to reasons why, but basically we're trying to help connect people with resources to make their homes more energy efficient, make them safer, remediate their roofs, remediate mold, things of that nature. And then in terms of policy and advocacy level work, we're working on things like, this Just Us program. So we're like helping folks who are advocating in their own neighborhoods, whether that's something like a concrete crusher, where we just supported a neighborhood organizing group called Core City, and they have been very successful in holding Murray Wilkel accountable in Core City. We're also working with the Schoolcraft Improvement Association right now, who are fighting another concrete crusher. And when I say concrete crusher, I had a hard time visualizing it until I went there, but it's a mountain of dirt. And when I say mountain, it's not really illustrative. I think I've been down ski hills that are shorter than these piles of, construction debris. And there's dust blowing off and it's getting all over the road. It's in people's gardens, it's in community gardens, it's on people's homes, windows. So showing up for fights like that, where community members are the actual leaders in these initiatives. We also offer advocacy training, so understanding that organizing skills are things that can be taught, right? No one's born really knowing anything. One of the cool things about human beings is like our brains are still super smooth when we're babies, right? So our cognitive abilities all develop after we're already born. So with that approach, thinking these are skills that can be taught. No one's born being a good organizer. Everyone has their own strengths, and we're going to help people learn how to advocate for themselves, how to navigate some of these systems, whether that's something like the Michigan Public Service Commission and knowing how to give testimony and how to do that effectively. That's some of the advocacy training we do. And then we're also involved in this big conversation around a green amendment. And that would be an amendment to the state constitution, along with a number of other organizations, to basically codify people's right to a healthy environment and everything that comes with that. We know that we can't drink oil we can't eat money. We need to have clean water. We need to have clean air. We need to have healthy soil. So those are some of the things that we're working on. Here are some of our partners as well. Um, and like I said, I know I went pretty fast through all that, but my hope is really that we can sort of like open this up now to maybe more of a conversation. And I see some people might have put things in the chat too. So feel free to raise your hand, I guess, if something, stood out or you got a question.
Thank you so much for that, Andrew. I'll help you moderate a little bit. Stephanie, do you want to go? Stephanie Beyonce, hi there, in the chat about programs involved with water quality at all, Andrew? How do you make that nexus to water in some of the DWJ work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Detroit is, how do I want to say this? Has real problems with water quality and issues with water. And that stems from everything from pollution to also policy decisions like the water shutoffs that happened a few years ago here, where people, even folks who are paying their water bill, were having their water shut off. So historically, Detroiters working for environmental justice and people that we engage with have been very involved in that fight. Right now, there are some champions in the city of Detroit that are doing really good work in terms of water focused work. So We the People Detroit is an organization that I'll shout out for doing really principled, forward thinking work around water affordability legislation and um, making sure that it's actually funded and accessible. The People's Water Board is another group that's been doing work that's really based in community here in Detroit and also in Lansing, working at a state level to pass a slate of water assistance bills that are currently in committee for this year. So those are a couple organizations that I want to make sure that I sort of name in terms of being the leaders in water justice work. And because we have such strong leaders in that, we haven't been focusing on that as much in this specific moment.
Yeah, nice. There's not that many folks here. We could go ahead and unmute Trent. Trent, I see you in the chat a couple of times talking about driving up through some of those polluting industrial areas, even south of Detroit proper, and has a question about public transit. Do you want to go ahead and ask your question, Trent? Go ahead and unmute and meet Andrew. Do it. You able to? Where'd he go? Okay. He's outside and it's very windy. LOL. I got your back. No worries. Well, what do you think? I mean, that I'm really interested. I love the detour, and I love the creativity and all the play on the words here. The just us and the detour. It's also right. Very. You guys take that very clever approach to these, but I love that the detour doesn't just include the sort of toxic sites, right? That it's also seems like it's about what are the sort of solutions and some of those places there, right? Do you include some of those? Trent says he just drove up I-75 North, all those polluting industrial areas south of the city, right? We call that Ohio, don't we? In some circles. What would you say to that, Andrew, about are those included in the detour? And why do you think it's so important, to my point, that you also include those solution places and not just show, the toxic side?
Yeah, totally. I appreciate that framing of Trent's question. And also I see that he asked about public transit, so I'm going to try and hit all those things. We do include on the detour, the last time we run it is usually like by request, right? It's not something we're constantly doing, but if people are coming and they're interested, is a program that we'll offer. But usually we will go down to Southwest Detroit 48217, which is the most polluted zip code in the state of Michigan. And that's also known as the Tri-City area, right? It's River Rouge, Ecorse, and Southwest Detroit. And I think it's really powerful to see, right? I've worked on some music videos actually where we went and filmed there, and it was for a friend who has a cool, I'll plug Only Lucky Once, We Got Action is the song. But like we went and just filmed that right outside of the Marathon station down there because the Marathon refinery, uses oil from line 5. 30% of the oil that's transported through line 5 is refined at the Marathon plant. And that oil is used in things like our cars for transportation, although not very much of it because it's actually crude oil that's been mined from tar sand. So it's really not like gasoline grade, most of it. Most of it is used for like plastics and other sort of like oil byproducts. Which I think is important to note, right? There's this big narrative around like, oh, what are we going to do if we shut down line 5? And very little of that actually gets used in terms of like gasoline or propane in the state of Michigan. But like we do show that because it's a very powerful visual. You have these huge smokestack skyscrapers, things like that. And to try and, finish the thought in terms of tying it into the public transit question, I know like we've had conversations with True, and True seems like they've been doing a lot of really great, and that's Transit Riders United. I'm trying not to get lost in the alphabet soup. But they do a lot of great policy work, and they also try and connect some of the city of Detroit and the broader metro area and also rural areas, right? There's a big issue with lack of transportation in rural areas as well. And just thinking about like this EV transition as well, with a lot of these plants that are being constructed, polluting the neighborhoods. When we think about transportation, or when I think about transportation and environmental justice, I have really serious concerns about electric vehicles as a proposed solution. And I know that's not very popular, but I think it's really important to name that because electric vehicles require so much resource extraction and so much energy goes into refining minerals, into producing new cars, and then those aren't even affordable to most people in Detroit. 25% of homes in Detroit don't even have a personal vehicle to begin with. So an electric vehicle for someone in Detroit, that's not a real solution. So public transit has to be it, right? And I think it's also important to remember that Detroit used to have light rail. Like many cities in the United States, there was light rail that was extremely popular and ran very efficiently, much more energy efficiently, much more timely than buses. And that we moved away from using light rail, not because people didn't want it, but because there was a concentrated effort by the auto industry to switch from rail to buses, right? And it's called the General Motors streetcar conspiracy. If you want to look it up, it's not like a wingnut conspiracy theory. It's like they were convicted of conspiracy by a judge because they were using a front organization, a tire company, I believe, in order to lobby for buses. And what they did was they told all these townships across the nation and cities, hey, we'll give you free buses. We'll replace your rails. We'll pay for everything. And once they removed the light rails, they destroyed that infrastructure. So they literally torched streetcars. They, like paved over all the rails that were in the street. And now we're sort of stuck on these buses. So yeah, I'm a proponent of switching away from diesel buses. We know that damages kids' asthma who are going to schools. And also, I think when we're having these conversations around transit, yeah, let's bring back the streetcars. I see your comment, Marco.
Nice one. Deb, you want to get in there? You're just up the road from you at Greenfield Presbyterian around the Berkeley area. You want to introduce yourself, make a connection here with Andrew?
Well, hi, Andrew. Yeah. I know our group at our climate group at church has looked into taking one of your detours, and we kind of, we're looking forward to doing that. Just wondering what other volunteer opportunities that your organization might offer to those of us that would like to do some hands-on help.
Oh my goodness. I love this question. Thank you, Deb, or Deborah.
Deb is fine.
Deb is fine. Cool. I don't want to take too many liberties. But that's a great question. Honestly, right now we don't have a ton of volunteer opportunities. I think that if you sign up for our newsletter, There's a contact form on our website. Sign up for our newsletter. As we do have more volunteer opportunities, we'll be sure to let you know though. And then I'll also put my email in, so that way we can also just stay connected in case you do want to go on a detour or in case something else comes up.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
I wonder when some of the next advocacy trainings might be too. That might be a way, Deb and others, to really learn the approaches and what are the issues and those kind of pieces.
Oh yeah, let me clarify that really quickly too. Is a lot of our programming is really focused on um, Detroiters, right? And people who may not have had the opportunity before, or as many opportunities to advocate for themselves already. So that's most of what we're doing in terms of advocacy training is really identifying individuals who have powerful stories coming from impacted communities, and then helping them find the right person to tell their story. So I just want to clarify that as well. Thank you.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm glad I asked that, because I was like, what's going on with those two pieces there? Other questions, folks? This is an open invitation. Throw them in the chat, or this is a small enough group to unmute and make it happen here. I really I wanted to maybe talk a little bit though, Andrew, while we wait for other folks with questions, and do get in there, about this idea of energy burden, and how we're really thinking about that in the state. And again, we're really trying to think about that here at MyCan, as far as how does that really tie into the idea of citizen-led approaches. How does this tie into what it means to be in a republic slash democracy, right? Like, what are the real rights around utilities? How do we think about the public sphere in these ways? And really, what's that line, right, between the private to the public enterprise? Because I feel like the energy burden encapsulates so much of just the worldview that also needs to, that we're really challenging here when we think about taking what you call the principled justice approach. And when you hit the energy burden, it hits all of those privatization, all of those other pieces that are controlling a lot of the systems. And so I just wondered, we didn't spend a lot of time on it. I know it's a huge topic this year, and I wondered if you maybe would dive in a touch more about what you think about energy burden, and what the kind of work that DWEJ is doing in order to get folks to learn about that and advocate for themselves, and then of course change this whole system, right?
Yeah, totally. Happy to dive more into energy burden. I think when I think about the energy burden, I think about equity. And Detroit is one of the oldest industrial cities, which means that we have a very old electrical grid, which means that we have a very inefficient electrical grid, which means that we are burning a lot more fossil fuels in order to create the energy that Detroiters use than other places, especially like the suburbs, which develop much later. It also means that we have more outages. So it's not just that we're less efficient and burning more fossil fuels, it's also that we have more frequent outages, longer lasting outages in Detroit. And there's a disparity between, even within the city, who has the longest outages and the most frequent outages. And the simplest way to say it is that poor Black neighborhoods have the longest and most frequent outages. And the wealthier development district, for example, doesn't have to deal with that as much. So that's all part of the energy burden. The other thing about the energy burden that I want to say is there's a whole economic component too, where equity comes into play. And with that part, like I mentioned before, Detroiters are living in old houses. People have really high bills, and they have almost no protections. Right now, the people's protections are regulated basically as consumer rights. So how much think about, like what your right is in terms of like something you would buy at a store, right? Like false advertising. Except instead of, maybe it being, a shop you can take it back to and say, hey, this didn't work. Can I replace it? It's the giant utility that has a very opaque process for dealing with complaints, that has very little oversight from the Michigan Public Service Commission or any sort of governance body. The Michigan Public Service Committee is the regulatory body that oversees the utilities like consumers and DTE. But there really isn't a lot of tooth, right, in terms of what they can do to regulate these companies. And because the energy monopolies, the energy producers are so big and well connected, they have so many more resources to lobby, to build relationships with folks, to put forward their propaganda, right, and tell their side of the story. And meanwhile, folks who are working paycheck to paycheck, who can't pay their bills that are sometimes for $1,000, $2,000, are unable to take the time out of their day to deal with it. So what we also see are, disparity in shutoffs, where Black people are much more likely to have their power shut off. Anyone can have their power shut off if you're behind on your bill. Anyone. But where is that enforced? And it's in majority Black Detroit. And there's research to back all this up too. I just think it's important to be very clear when we're talking about this, about who's suffering from that. The one other thing that I'll say about the economic side of the energy burden has to do with where investments are going. So I won't make people come off mute or like raise your hands or anything, but I've heard conversation around like the Justice 40 initiative, for example, where 40% of the funds that are being administered through the IRA are supposed to go to historically disinvested in neighborhoods, right? Marginalized groups, people who have been passed over for other government subsidies or benefits. And I think that's a really important step, because if you look historically, the government has been offering subsidies for things like home solar, electric cars, home energy improvements to your houses. Like all these things are still available, and they have been available for a long time, but they haven't been available in an equitable way. So people who don't have enough cash to install, pay for the installation and then get a kickback when their taxes come back around, right, are people that have been passed over for that transition to green energy. So you see slower uptake in a lot of these renewable energy production, renewable energy home improvements, vehicle improvements, things like that in working class neighborhoods. So when we talk about equity, Justin Schott from the Energy Equity Project makes a really convincing argument that all of these funds and all of these subsidies should go to those who need it most, because these are the people who are using the most energy, not because they're being willy-nilly and running the AC with the screen door open or something like that, which my parents do. Drives me crazy, right? How many times do I have to have this conversation with you, Dad? But because they live in energy inefficient houses, through no fault of their own, because that's where they were born. So I guess like I kind of meandered there, but I hope that answers your question.
It was totally fantastic. I hoped you might meander a bit because it's such a big topic, and so I tried to give some parameters there so you could weave your way through how we really think about that from, I think, both the individual to the collective level. And I see the question there about the solar farm ballot issue. If you'd like me to give just a little background on that, folks, as they were coming in, Pam was asking a bit of a question about, hey, she has some farmland, it's prime farmland, a developer is approached their farm. The private pieces aren't impacted by that overall legislation that was part of the package last fall. That is for what we call utility scale scale, the large solar and wind farms. So if you're, a private landowner out there, farmer, whatever, thinking about putting solar on your land, that's your choice, right? Up to a certain amount of megawatts that I'm going to get wrong, so I'm not going to say it on the recording right now. But I will just take a second to say on the ballot initiative and the law that was passed last fall to give ultimate state control. We don't love it either, right? Is the way to think about this. We all know we need to increase renewable energy, solar in this state. Unfortunately, the utilities have stopped things like rooftop solar because there's a cap on that distributed generation. So when folks ask me, hey, why aren't they using the rooftops first? I say, you're darn right. I wish we would be. And one of the reasons we're not doing that is the utilities have capped the amount of that generation that can come from our houses into the overall system. And the other thing we didn't get last fall is something called community solar, which is our ability to create our own resiliency hubs and share that solar out, which we absolutely would want to do. And really, I think then the reason why the state decided to put this ultimate control in with the rest of the laws that got passed for 100% clean, our thoughts on some of these bills and didn't go far enough or fast enough, was that we are going to need to deploy all that. But I do want to just get some common misperceptions out today. Sorry, that's my neighborhood. If you can hear the cars going by. It does still allow for local decision making and public input. It creates at least a consistent process, and really was a response to being able to stop the folks who are out there fear mongering, frankly, around solar and wind. Again, we're not huge fans of that. I hope that was a little bit of an explanation, Frank and Pam and Andrew. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to the ballot initiative or some of that. I tried to give just the quickest piece to not steal the total thunder today, because you got a couple other questions in here to get to. But any other comments on that from you are welcome.
No, I really appreciate everything you said there. I agree wholeheartedly. The only thing that I'll add is that if we think about where the burden of our energy infrastructure rests today, it's felt very acutely by people in Detroit, right? By people who live near power plants and oil refineries, by people who live in the areas where the oil is being extracted and mined. So as we transition, one of those questions is, how can we share the burden of meeting our energy needs in a more just and fair way?
Thank you for that frame. This is why we invite Andrew to come speak. He's so eloquent and articulate about getting you really are to get to the heart of the matter. So City, do you want to introduce yourself? And I saw Ziggy and Stephanie connecting with you. City, do you want to talk about your question there as a future physician, if you're able to unmute?
Yeah, hi, I can unmute. Can you guys hear me? Okay,
Yeah,
good.
sorry if I might have mispronounced your name. Sorry about that.
Oh no, you were close. My name is City. I'm a first year med student, like I said, at Michigan. So I'm over in Ann Arbor right now. And again, I mean, as we go through our education and learn about all the different organ systems, like the biggest question on my mind is, okay, like how can we show up in the climate crisis, and what can physicians do? Because I think we have such an important role in just like maintaining people's health in general, that I also think that physicians have such a big role in health, and like a lot of like what the community workers do over at DWEJ as well. So also just, I know this isn't necessarily your area, but just curious from your perspective, what physicians can do. I know we have Micah as well, and we have people from Micah as well, so definitely know about that. But any other thoughts you might have, I would love to hear.
Yeah, I'm glad you named Micah, because like I said, when there are people doing good work on specific areas, I want to shout them out. You mentioned like organs, and it's like, we got 2 kidneys, but we only have 1 heart. We only got like 1 liver, gallbladder, all that stuff. We don't need a ton of duplicity in the ecosystem. I think that that's a framework that's also true for ecosystems, right? Where it's like in healthy, robust ecosystems, you see a lot of like specialization. So I think that something that has been challenging for some of our community health workers is that the people they're working with have so many life or death concerns that when it comes to something like toxic dust, it really falls pretty low on their priority list. When people are living paycheck to paycheck, you know, you can give, like, we give people light bulbs, right? More energy efficient lowers their bill. They say thank you, but it's hard to get people to maybe engage beyond that. And at the same time, it's not that like they're unaware. It's just that the system that we live in is really designed to keep people trapped in a cycle of poverty. It's capitalism. I'm just gonna say it. People are being exploited, right, within the United States. So like educating people about their health and well-being and getting people to care is critical, and I'm glad that's part of our work. And also, as someone who's getting an advanced degree, like you're going to be in a position of privilege where people are going to respect your opinion on things. So you're going to be in a position to be advocating for policy work that is not just focused on educating people in their communities, but also addressing some of the built environment or policy structures that we live in. And that might be like a unique vantage point that you could explore. I think because there's a policy component to your question too. Does that help?
Yeah, totally. That makes a lot of sense. And I'm seeing something about fossil fuel interests as well, but I'm also just thinking about how, yes, like people in the healthcare system in general can play a big role in not just educating patients, but policy and being on that larger stage for sure. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks for your
And
question.
I'm a pediatrician. This is Pam Otis. I was on earlier. I'm a pediatrician, and I think this is a huge issue for those of us, especially in primary care. And one of the things I can say to anyone who's a medical student is go into primary care. You will have the biggest influence on people and families in that way. And with your academies, whether it's the Academy of Pediatrics or Family Medicine or the AMA, there are physician groups that are very involved in this issue. There's a medical journal. I spoke at a medical conference that was all about health and the environment. So the awareness is rising, and it's our responsibility to keep it live and not be quiet and go as big as you want.
That's definitely great advice. Thank you.
I love this cross conversation. Lisa, since we invoked you, do you want to say a quick words about Micah or jump into this conversation? The president of Michigan Clinicians for Climate Action, Dr. Lisa Del Buono, is with us.
Thanks so much, Denise. And thanks so much, Andrew. What a great discussion. And I don't want to occupy too much time, but Pam, I couldn't agree more. And so Micah is one of 25 state affiliates to the Medical Society Consortium on Climate and Health, which is a consortium of over 50 medical societies, including the American Medical Association and the Academy of Pediatrics and many, many more. So you're right, Pam, we are a unified voice. And what I would say is the work that Andrew has done in the Detroit Workers for Environmental Justice is key to us understanding how we can be helpful. I mean, I have learned so much from Andrew and from Nicole, who works with Andrew and the community health workers. For Andrew talks about proximity, and you have to be proximate to it to genuinely understand the need and concerns. And I think that's what Andrew and people working in that space provide And I think then what we can offer back is the privilege that Andrew spoke about, our degree, and then marrying it with peer-reviewed data to validate that what they're seeing is honest, and that, you know, there are huge disparities that we must start calling out. So I think our work could be incredibly collaborative, and I am so grateful for what DWEJ does and the community health workers within there. So that's too much probably, but thanks.
Not at all. Thank you, Lisa.
Elise, it looks like you had a question to bring us back to some things, and then I see you, Jonathan, aka I don't know why you came in as Serena, but that's going to be hilarious to the team later. That's one of our staffers. I have no idea why the Zoom renamed yourself. Oh my gosh, he's too funny. Elise, you had a question though about mitigation and connections there.
Yeah, I can speak to that. I may have missed some of this, but I was interested in foregrounding, of course, environmental justice issues when we advocate for policy. So where are the best sort of overlaps? What are the things that both meet those needs that Detroiters really need with respect to environmental justice, while also pushing forward progress on climate change mitigation and those things? So I was just curious what you had to say on that front.
Can you get a little more specific? I'm like, because when it comes to climate, I think it's like a really broad category. It's hard for me to know where to start.
Well, I mean, it could be, I honestly could also be climate change adaptation, but anything that sort of reduces obviously fossil fuel emissions or helps people deal with the forthcoming issues like urban heat island or all sorts of other issues that are kind of coming with it. So where are the sort of best policy places to, would you say, to kind of really push and advocate for on that?
Oh, great question. I think we're fortunate because there is a lot of policy movement around fossil fuels. I think that people are finally starting to sort of like catch up on that. But when it comes to our policy analysis, and I understand that this is challenging for a variety of reasons, I think it's really important to just broaden the framework to be more than carbon emissions, right? Like we know methane is the largest contributor to global warming in the world, right? Or of the fossil fuels. But that's also really a small fraction of what goes into healthy ecosystems. So what I've been working on as a part of a working group within the Michigan Energy, Michigan Jobs Coalition has been trying to create a rubric, literally, in order to look at environmental justice and policy. So that way we're not getting caught in the rat race, so to speak, or the electoral cycle, where it's let's rush to push this through because we have this, you know, last year it was the Democratic trifecta, right? And it's great that we pushed through a package that codifies, hey, we're going to transition to renewable energies. But you know what was included was a lot of loopholes that allow things like natural gas like generators, right? So like, is it really a victory? Is it a step in the right direction, right? And I think like we so often get caught up in this like the urgency of everything because it is so urgent that sometimes the quality of the work or the depth of our analysis suffers. So I think like when it comes to any sort of policy work, just like slowing down. And one thing I'll say on this is there's a really helpful piece called The Pillars of White Supremacy Culture. And that looks specifically at organizations, right? It's been applied to like individuals and people, and I think that there's some issues with that. But it's very helpful in terms of looking at organizational culture and understanding where some of the more nefarious ways that we're socialized allow inequality and white supremacy to be replicated. So thinking about like a sense of urgency is one, and then an antidote of that is just slowing down, right? So I'll leave it at that for now because I could talk about that for a while.
Thanks for that. I knew once you got the question, it would expand your thought. It is 7:01. If you got to go, you got to go. But I'm hoping, Jonathan, aka Serena, do you have a question? Did you want to ask something?
Yes, Serena helped me out. I couldn't get in with my link,
I
so
saw
she sent me her link. So don't be teasing her too much because she.
this is going to go down in Mike in history. Come on now.
All right, well, I have a question, and certainly it's something that next month we can address because my group is going to present for what little work we've done. But when we talk about, and I've only thought of this for a little bit, so it might be a little disjointed, but when we talk about environmental justice, a lot of work has been done, rightfully so, in urban areas, in cities. And I live out in the country. And so that message is not really, it's even getting twisted, I think, a little bit, or I'm concerned that it will. What does environmental justice look like in the country, in the rural areas? And, you know, a lot of it is big corporations are taking advantage of people who are the have-nots. So the suburbanites do pretty well in the city and the urbanites don't do so well. So out in the country, the same thing happens. So we're looking at 30 to 45 miles from every major city, massive landfills that smell to high heaven, and CAFOs where you've got cesspools and people flying over your house and poisoning your woods because someone caught the horse virus. What was what was that, like a few years ago? They're spreading poison everywhere. You've got coal-fired power plants spewing mercury all over your soils. You've got encephalitis, thank you, equine encephalitis, Lois. You've got nuclear power plants getting started back up. You've got, you know, all of those things. And I have a concern because it seems to me that the powers that Andrew just sort of alluded to, let's make white people into victims, that's been played pretty well with certain groups. And so I'm not sure, but I'm wondering, A, how do we get environmental justice defined and a little more play out in the rural areas? And B, is the resistance that we're seeing to windmills and solar farms part of that feeling of, I'm just this little person, and here is the government and big corporations coming in, and they're going to change our landscape in a massive way that just doesn't feel right to a lot of people. And even farmers that are, you know, that are growing, they're progressive leaning people have said to me, you know, okay, but I don't like solar on farms. And so there's a little bit of reality check that's not there. Okay, that's my question.
No, thank you. Thank
Basically,
you.
what I'm hoping you'll do, Andrew, is maybe think about that. Give me a little bit today because the meeting's over, but think about that and make that part of our presentation if you'll be available next month for that.
Oh, I would love to collaborate because I think addressing the so-called urban-rural divide is really important, right?
Really?
And like to go back to the like DWEJ's mission, it doesn't say Black people anywhere in there. It says impacted people, right? And like when we look at rural areas, absolutely, especially in Michigan, it's mostly white people, and they're definitely being impacted by environmental justice issues. And let's not just talk about like the major polluters out there, but also companies like Monsanto, right? Who have made it impossible for family farms to make a profit, right? And let's also look at policy things like the Farm Bill, because most of what people are growing on their farms isn't actually for food, right? We get soy, we get corn, and that's going into ethanol, right? That's going into creating biodiesel and fuel. So one other thing is just like a lot of people who are now living in rural places have been dispossessed, right? They may have had a family farm at one point and then it got foreclosed on. because they didn't have enough cash to be able to pay for their taxes, right? So their distrust of the government is extremely valid, right? Where they were able to provide for themselves, make enough food, exchange goods with their neighbors to survive, but they didn't have cash on hand for taxes. And now your farm's being foreclosed on and is now being rolled up into one of these like giant mega farms that are, I will say it is an industry, the agricultural industry. And something that's been super illuminating for me is like working with people who are doing permaculture work, who are doing habitat restoration, and people in rural areas that I've spoken to care deeply about their waterways, right? They want healthy rivers because they fish and they eat the fish out of the river. So when you have PFAS in your waterways, that's directly impacting you, and you are an impacted community because of whatever reason it might be, whether it's Camp Grayling, the National Guard base, or an auto manufacturing plastic company. So I think like people have very legitimate concerns and they might be coming at it from a different angle. And what we can do as practitioners and experts in climate justice, environmental justice, is help people realize that their interests are actually not contrary to each other, right? It's not a zero-sum game where if there's more funding going to urban communities for this stuff, it means that rural people are going to like bite the ticket. Is that people in their communities are already suffering injustices, and that actually we need to start addressing the forces that are profiting off of the perpetuation of those injustices.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for that question. It's one of the things that what I'm excited to work on with all of our network and all of these folks that we are partners and allies to. Because right, if we talked about energy burden and energy democracy a little bit tonight, right? In our rural areas, same concept, energy independence, right? It's the same sort of set of factors that lead to an outcome, and yet those forces are pitted against each other as if they were opposites, and they're not at all. And I think that we all have a lot of great work to do that's a winning political coalition is what I always try to think about too. And if we could really get our rural energy independence folks and our urban energy democracy folks working together on these pieces rather than allowing ourselves to be divided by other folks, we could make a big impact. So I really appreciate that answer. And you two, I should have mentioned, Detroit's working for environmental justice and Van Buren climate action team is Jonathan. You're both members of our steering committee, and that has just been a wonderful way for MyCan to really understand what all the groups are doing and help us get the right issues and align those campaigns. And this right here is exactly the kind of conversations that I hope come out of those. We are way over time. Thank you for your generosity, Andrew, on this this lovely evening out here. So I think I'm going to call the recording here, and thank you, Andrew, so much. I think here, I'll put it on the full view. I think Andrew deserves a round of applause or whatever emoji, or give him some love in the chat. All right. Thank you so much for talking
Thank
to
you,
us
Denise. I
about all
appreciate you.
this.